So I want to talk with you a little bit about how research articles are organized because generally they follow the same conventions with some really minor variations. And once you understand how these articles are organized, it's actually really easy to find the information that you need. And so I'm just going to walk you through this process. I would recommend that you actually maybe pull up the Mullen and Nadler article and look through it as I'm talking about it so that you can see what I am referring to. So one of the first things that you'll see, most research articles at the start of the article offer an abstract. And this is about a paragraph that is supposed to summarize the article and its key points. The abstract is helpful because if you're looking through a bunch of articles and trying to decide what's going to be useful, the abstract can quickly help you decide, is this relevant or not? Having said that, lots of people who write articles write their abstract at the very end when they're really tired. And so abstracts don't always have the most important information in them. And so you definitely don't want to use the abstract to be the basis for like a summary or quote when you're writing a literature review. So just keep in mind that the abstract is helpful, but shouldn't be the only thing you're going to read if you're actually going to be writing about an article. The next main section that you're going to find in research articles is the introduction and literature review. Sometimes these things will have headers in them, but they will rarely say this is the introduction and this is the literature review. Just know that that's where articles typically start. So you'll usually have a paragraph or maybe a few paragraphs that are the introduction that give an overall view of the article and what inspired the researcher to start this project. The literature review will be longer. They're often a page or a couple of pages. They may have subheadings that point you to different key themes that are in past literature, but this is all going to be the material at the start of the article. The next section can be referred to a couple of different ways. It might be called the methods section, or it might be called the data section, but it's going to describe how the study was actually carried out, who was studied, where the study took place, all of those kinds of details. So you're always going to find this after the literature review. After they describe how they collected their data, you're going to find the next section it's usually either called results or findings. There are just different preferences here, but it means the same thing. And this is where the researchers describe what they found as the result of their analysis. And lastly, it'll usually end with a discussion or conclusion, or sometimes both. The discussion is usually the section that makes sense of the findings, so tells us what's important about them. If you're trying to figure out what the important findings are, you might find some helpful information here. The conclusion is what we should take away from this study. So it's a little different from the discussion, like what conclusions we should draw and where we should go forward from here. But again, sometimes these will be combined into one discussion, sometimes they'll be separated. What I talk about is how to actually read a research article. You know, scholars rarely sit down and read an article from start to end. I'm really only going to do that with an article that is, for some reason, really special to me. Maybe it's one that I want to use as a model. Maybe it's really close to my research, so I want to make sure I understand it. But for a lot of research, we're going to read in a very targeted way to try to find certain pieces of information. So that's what I want you to practice doing. You know ahead of time the questions you're going to be trying to answer. I will give those to you with the article analyses assignments. So I want you to go in looking for specific information, and really, once you've found what you're looking for, you can stop reading. This means you might be jumping around, so you won't read every section from start to end. And also, once you've answered every question, you can just stop. Getting used to reading like this is probably going to take you a little while to get comfortable, but the good news is this is also going to save you some time. I want to talk about is if you're going to be reading intentionally, where do you find what you're looking for? So I want to cover a couple of things that are typically in the article analyses assignment and just tell you where to look for them. So the first thing is I'll ask you for some article citation information, things like the author's name and the journal and that kind of stuff. And you'll usually find this at the header. So at the very start of the article, there might be a cover page, or just toward the top, there will be information about the journal and the title and all of that kind of stuff. One thing I'm going to ask you to identify is the deficiency in past research. So it's often what's missing from what researchers have studied about this topic in the past. And you may find this in the intro or the lit review. Very often you'll find it toward the end. So you'll find it when the author is summarizing everything that they have found already in the literature, and then they'll tell you what's missing or what's deficient about that past research. And so that's generally where you're going to look. The research question might be at the very end of the lit review, or it might be at the start of the methods or data collection section, but usually it'll be at the end of the lit review. So often the deficiency and the research question go close together. The data collection method, which I'll ask you about, will be in the methods section. Again, remember, sometimes this is called data, but that's where you'll find how the researchers did the research that they conducted. The sample you will also find in the methods or data section, and this is where they'll describe who the people are in their sample, or if they're using something else, like I do a study of television shows, and I'll tell you which television shows I selected and how. I'm going to ask you to identify key variables or concepts used in the research, and you'll often find this in the methods section, or you might find it in the results. In quantitative articles, you may find it in the results section where the authors are describing how the data was analyzed. The key findings will often be in the results or findings section. Makes sense, right? Because they're findings. So this is where the authors will describe what they figured out in their study. And then I'm going to ask you to identify strengths and weaknesses about articles. I'm going to ask you to do this a little later in the semester after you have a little more knowledge about data collection. But sometimes you might find some of this discussion at the end in the discussion or conclusion, where the authors say what the limitations of the study were. But this is actually a place where I'm asking for your take. So what do you think was really good about this study, and what could have been improved? So this is really more your take on the article rather than something that the authors are going to give you. So keep this in mind. Revisit this when you actually are working on article analyses now and in the future. And eventually you're going to get really good at just finding the information that you need and reading so that you have an understanding of the article, but skipping the things that don't help you answer the questions at hand.